The quiet routine of Emma's night shift. Emma had been working the late night shift at a gas station for a while now. The job was quiet, with few customers coming through the doors after midnight. The gas station was located on the outskirts of a small town, far from the bustle of the main roads. Most nights Emma enjoyed the peace. She would keep herself busy by tidying up the store, checking inventory, and waiting for the occasional customer. It was a routine she had grown accustomed to, one that she found somewhat comforting. As the hours dragged on, the clock finally neared 6 a.m., the end of her shift. She felt a sense of relief as the night ended and the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. Emma looked forward to her walk home. She lived about a kilometer away from the station, and it was a peaceful stroll through empty streets. There was something calming about the stillness of the town in the early morning hours, but tonight something felt off. Emma couldn't pinpoint what it was, but there was a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Emma stepped out of the gas station, locking the door behind her. The cool morning air greeted her as she pulled her coat tighter around herself, setting off for home. The streets were eerily quiet with no cars passing by. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement, the only sound in the stillness. She tried to shake off the uneasy feeling but couldn't help but glance over her shoulder every so often. She had walked this route countless times, but tonight felt different. There was a growing sense of being watched. Emma tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the isolation of the early hours playing tricks on her mind. She focused on the sound of her shoes hitting the pavement and the soft rustling of trees in the distance. The quiet town, with its sparse streetlights and empty roads, had always felt safe. But now, with each step, the silence seemed louder, more oppressive. Then she heard it. Footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate. At first, she told herself it was just someone walking at the same pace. But when she glanced behind her, no one was there. Her heart began to race. Am I imagining this, she thought? But the footsteps continued. Closer, closer. Emma quickened her pace, trying to calm herself. Maybe it's nothing, she thought. But the footsteps kept matching her own. She glanced back again, and this time she saw him, a tall figure, dark, clothes blending into the shadows. The man wasn't running, but his pace was too deliberate. He wasn't walking with any particular urgency, but there was something about the way he moved that made Emma's stomach drop. A feeling of dread washed over her. The man was following her. She could no longer deny it. He was walking behind her, maintaining the same distance. It was too quiet, too strange. She picked up her pace, trying to outdistance him, but it didn't work. With each step, he was right there behind her, matching her every move. Emma's heart pounded. She tried to tell herself she was being paranoid, but the feeling of someone stalking her was undeniable. She couldn't shake the image of the man, his face hidden in the shadows, walking just close enough to be dangerous. Fear crawled up her spine, and for the first time in a long while she wished she wasn't walking alone. Emma's breath came quicker now as she walked faster, almost to a jog. The footsteps were still there, unrelenting. She could feel him getting closer with every passing second. What did he want? Was he just another person walking down the street, or was he following her for a reason? She reached the end of the block, a part of the street she recognized as close to her home. Her house was only a few doors away, but Emma didn't feel safe. The man hadn't stopped. Her mind raced with fear. She could hear the footsteps gaining ground, each one echoing in her ears. It was then that the knock came, but it wasn't a knock on a door, it was the sound of her own footsteps. Wait, no, she realized. The knocks weren't from her. They were coming from behind her. They were louder, harder. Someone was knocking on the pavement right behind her. Emma turned, her heart skipping a beat, but she couldn't see the man clearly. He was just a shape in the dark. She couldn't risk looking away for too long. She had to get to her house. Emma finally reached her house, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her keys. She unlocked the door as quickly as she could, slamming it shut behind her and bolting it tight. The house was quiet, but her mind was racing. She backed away from the door, feeling trapped. Her heart was pounding in her chest. but she didn't dare open the door again to look outside. And then it came again, the knock. This time, louder and more insistent. Knock. A brief pause. Knock. The sound was coming from the front door, and Emma froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe it. He had followed her home. She looked out the window to see if anyone was there, but all she could see was the dark outline of her front yard. A cold chill ran through her. She wasn't alone. Someone was at her door. The knock came again, louder and more desperate this time. Emma's hands were trembling as she dialed 911. Her voice was shaky, but she managed to explain what was happening. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way. The knock on the door grew louder with each passing moment. The man outside wasn't leaving. Emma's mind raced as she waited for the police to arrive. She didn't dare open the door or peek out the window. She stayed silent, trying to remain as still as possible. The longer the knock persisted, the more frantic it became. The rhythm changed. Harder, faster, more aggressive. Emma backed away from the door, clutching her phone tightly. She thought about running out the back, but what if he was already waiting there? She couldn't trust her own instincts anymore. Everything felt wrong, too wrong to ignore. Was he trying to break in? Was he waiting for her to make a mistake? Her breathing was heavy. Time dragged on. Every knock on the door made her heart skip a beat. The man wasn't leaving, and he wasn't giving up. Her thoughts were a jumble of fear and confusion. What did he want? Why wouldn't he just go away? After what felt like an eternity, Emma finally heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by another wave of fear. The knocks stopped just as the sirens grew louder, but Emma didn't dare open the door yet. She waited for the officers to arrive and for them to clear the area. When they did arrive, they quickly searched the perimeter of the house but found nothing. No sign of anyone near the door, no footprints in the snow. The man had disappeared as if he had never been there at all. The police reassured Emma that they would investigate, but there was no evidence to follow up on. Emma was left alone with her thoughts, unsure of what had just happened. Had it been a figment of her imagination? Had she just overreacted? But deep down, she knew that something was off. The way the knocks had echoed the man's persistence, it all felt too real. As the days passed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She replayed that night over and over in her mind. Who was the man? Why had he followed her? The police had no answers. They had checked surveillance footage from the gas station, but nothing unusual had shown up. The stranger had simply vanished into thin air. Emma became obsessed with the idea that he might return. She started locking all her doors and windows every night before bed, even during the day when she was at work. Her home, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The feeling of being watched never left her. Every creak in the floorboards, every movement outside her window made her jump. She even started installing security cameras around her house, but they never seemed to catch anything. Months passed, and Emma tried to return to normal life. She no longer walked home at night, opting to drive to and from work. But the fear remained. She couldn't escape the feeling that the man would one day return. She kept expecting to hear the knock at her door again. Every time someone knocked, her heart would race, but it was never him. It wasn't just the fear of that night. It was the feeling of not knowing who he was or what he wanted from her. The sense that someone had been watching her, planning something, haunted her every day. Even now, long after that terrifying night, Emma still hears the knock. It comes sometimes when she's alone in her house, just a faint tap on the door, followed by silence. She's always afraid to open it. She's always afraid to look outside. The man never returned, but the sound of that knock will forever be etched in her memory. And she will never forget the night when a stranger followed her home, knocked at her door, and disappeared.